The betrayal came without warning. In the unforgiving arena of progressive politics, where solidarity is supposed to be sacred and the squad stands together against all enemies, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did the unthinkable. She threw her ideological brother under the bus with surgical precision, using the exact same word that Donald Trump had weaponized against the progressive movement: dangerous. The political earthquake that followed would shatter the left-wing coalition that had taken years to build and leave Zohran Mamdani politically isolated in ways he never imagined possible. Because when your own allies call you dangerous, everyone else assumes you must be. The setup for this progressive civil war had been building for weeks, hidden beneath the surface of what appeared to be a united left-wing front. Behind closed doors in Washington, Democratic leadership had been growing increasingly concerned about Mamdani's radical rhetoric and its potential impact on the party's electoral prospects. Nancy Pelosi had quietly commissioned internal polling that showed Mamdani's confrontational style was hurting Democrats in swing districts. Chuck Schumer was fielding angry calls from New York donors who were threatening to redirect their contributions. Most damaging of all, moderate Democrats were beginning to distance themselves from progressive causes entirely, fearing association with what they saw as Mamdani's extremist agenda. But it was AOC who found herself in the most difficult position. As the most prominent young progressive in Congress and a fellow New Yorker, she was expected to defend Mamdani against all criticism. Their political journeys had been remarkably similar: young, charismatic outsiders who had challenged the establishment and won unlikely victories through grassroots organizing. They shared the same policy goals, the same revolutionary rhetoric, even the same enemies. To the outside world, they were natural allies, two bright stars in the progressive constellation. The reality was far more complicated. Private tensions between AOC and Mamdani had been simmering since his election victory. Sources close to both camps later revealed that AOC's team had grown concerned about Mamdani's uncontrolled public statements and his tendency to make headlines with inflammatory rhetoric rather than substantive policy work. During a private dinner in November, just weeks after Mamdani's election, AOC had reportedly urged him to pick his battles more strategically and warned that his confrontational approach could hurt the broader progressive movement. Alexandria was trying to be a mentor, one insider revealed months later. She understood better than anyone the pressures of being a young progressive in the spotlight. But Zohran seemed to think that compromise was weakness, that any strategic thinking was selling out. He wanted to be more radical than AOC, which is saying something. The breaking point came during a, quote, closed-door meeting of the Progressive Caucus on December 15th. The meeting, held in a basement conference room of the Rayburn building, was supposed to be a strategy session for the new legislative session. Instead, it became a heated confrontation between two very different visions of progressive politics. According to multiple sources who were present, Mamdani had been invited to address the caucus about his plans for New York and how federal progressives could support his agenda. What was intended as a routine courtesy call turned into something much more explosive when Mamdani began outlining his revolutionary approach to governing America's largest city. "We can't keep playing by rules that were written by our oppressors," Mamdani reportedly told the assembled congresspeople. "The federal government, the state government, the corporate media, they're all part of the same system designed to prevent real change. Sometimes you have to break things before you can build something better." The room had grown increasingly uncomfortable as Mamdani's rhetoric escalated. Several moderate progressives exchanged worried glances. But it was when Mamdani suggested that progressive mayors should consider selective non-compliance with federal policies they disagreed with that AOC finally spoke up. "Hold up," she had interrupted, her voice carrying the authority that had made her a national figure. "That's not progressive politics. That's just chaos. We can't build a movement on the foundation of breaking laws whenever we feel like it." The exchange that followed would be whispered about in progressive circles for months. Witnesses described a tense back and forth where Mamdani accused AOC of being co-opted by the establishment, while she warned him about the dangers of performative radicalism that prioritized headlines over actual progress. But their private disagreement remained private until Trump's dangerous comment created a crisis that forced AOC to make a public choice between party loyalty and political survival. The moment of truth came during a December 18th appearance on Pod Save America, the influential podcast hosted by former Obama staffers. AOC had been booked to discuss the party's agenda for the new year, but the hosts immediately pressed her about Mamdani's increasingly controversial statements and Trump's characterization of the NYC mayor-elect as dangerous. For several minutes, AOC tried to thread the needle, offering measured support for Mamdani's passion for justice while distancing herself from his tactical choices. But when co-host Jon Favreau asked directly whether she thought Mamdani's approach was helping or hurting the progressive cause, something in AOC's carefully constructed diplomatic facade cracked. "Look," she said, her voice taking on the sharp edge that had made her famous during congressional hearings. "I have to be honest here. What I'm seeing from New York right now isn't progressive politics. Progressive politics is about building coalitions, expanding our base, and actually delivering results for working people. What I'm seeing is something else. It's performative, it's divisive, and frankly, it's dangerous to everything we've been trying to build." The word dangerous hung in the podcast studio like a bomb waiting to explode. The hosts immediately recognized the significance of AOC using Trump's exact terminology to describe her supposed ally. But AOC wasn't finished. "We've spent years fighting against the narrative that progressives are too radical, too angry, too disruptive to govern effectively," she continued. "Every time we've made progress, it's been because we've shown people that our policies work, that our approach makes sense, that we're fighting for them, not just against something. What's happening in New York threatens all of that progress because it reinforces every negative stereotype about our movement." The interview, released that evening, sent shockwaves through progressive political circles. Within hours, number AOCV's Mamdani was trending on Twitter, with political observers struggling to process the sight of the progressive movement's two brightest stars tearing each other apart in public. Conservative media was jubilant. Fox News played clips of AOC's criticism on repeat, with Tucker Carlson gleefully noting that even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thinks this guy is too radical for America. Right-wing Twitter accounts shared the podcast audio with captions like, "Even AOC admits progressives too dangerous for America." But the reaction from progressive activists was even more devastating for Mamdani. Many of the grassroots organizers who had supported his campaign began publicly questioning their allegiance. If AOC, the politician who had inspired their own political awakening, thought Mamdani had gone too far, maybe it was time to reconsider their support. The political establishment moved quickly to capitalize on the rift. Within 24 hours of AOC's podcast appearance, 3 major Democratic donors who had been withholding support from Mamdani's transition efforts announced they would not be contributing to any New York City initiatives. 2 prominent progressive organizations quietly removed Mamdani from their endorsement lists. Most damaging of all, several members of his own transition team began reaching out to other opportunities, sensing that their association with Mamdani could hurt their future political prospects. Mamdani's response to AOC's criticism was swift and catastrophically miscalculated. Rather than seeking to repair the relationship privately or offering a measured public response, he chose to escalate the conflict in the most public way possible, a live-streamed press conference from City Hall. Standing at a podium decorated with "People Before Politics" banners, Mamdani delivered what his critics would later call his suicide speech, a 20-minute tirade that burned every bridge he had left in progressive politics. "I'm disappointed but not surprised to see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez attacking the very principles she once claimed to support," Mamdani began, his voice dripping with contempt. "It seems like Washington has done what Washington always does. It's turned a revolutionary into a reformer, a fighter into a fundraiser." The personal nature of the attack shocked even Mamdani's supporters. Calling AOC a sellout was political suicide, but he wasn't finished. When you spend more time worrying about what donors think than what working people need, when you care more about your media image than about justice, you've lost your way, Mamdani continued. "The same people who are calling my approach dangerous are the ones who think the real danger is threatening their comfortable position in an unjust system." The live stream, watched by hundreds of thousands of people in real time, became an instant political disaster. Every major progressive leader was forced to choose sides, and virtually all of them chose AOC. Bernie Sanders, who had initially been sympathetic to Mamdani's message, issued a statement supporting AOC's thoughtful leadership of the progressive movement. Elizabeth Warren called for unity and strategic thinking in progressive politics, a barely veiled criticism of Mamdani's approach. Most devastating of all was the response from the Working Families Party, which had been instrumental in Mamdani's election victory. In a statement that would be quoted in political science textbooks for years to come, WFP National Director Maurice Mitchell wrote, "Progressive politics without strategic thinking isn't progress, it's just politics. The movement needs leaders who understand that good intentions without effective tactics won't change anyone's material conditions." The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within a week of his attack on AOC, Mamdani had lost the support of virtually every major progressive organization in the country. Union leaders who had enthusiastically endorsed his candidacy began privately discussing whether they could withdraw their support before he took office. Democratic operatives started floating the names of potential primary challengers for his next election, even though he hadn't been sworn in yet. But perhaps the most damaging consequence was the way AOC's criticism legitimized every other attack on Mamdani's political approach. If the most prominent progressive in Congress thought he was dangerous, then moderate Democrats felt free to say he was reckless. If AOC questioned his commitment to coalition building, then centrist commentators could argue he was too extreme for mainstream politics. The young politician who had seemed destined to become a national progressive leader just weeks earlier now found himself politically radioactive, abandoned by allies and gleefully attacked by enemies. His transition team was in chaos, with key staff positions remaining unfilled as qualified. Candidates declined to associate themselves with his increasingly toxic brand. The broader implications for progressive politics were equally severe. The movement that had been built on the promise of solidarity and shared struggle was now publicly divided, with its two most prominent young leaders engaged in bitter warfare. Conservative strategists were already planning campaigns designed to exploit these divisions, confident that they could use AOC's words against any progressive candidate in future elections. In a final twist of irony, the politician who had promised to turn the volume up on progressive politics had instead turned his allies against him with volume that even they couldn't tolerate. AOC's devastating assessment that his approach was dangerous to everything we've been trying to build had effectively ended his national political ambitions before they had truly begun. The lesson was brutal but unmistakable. In progressive politics, ideological purity without strategic thinking is a recipe for isolation, not revolution. Mamdani had learned too late that even revolutionaries need allies, and that burning bridges with your own movement is the fastest way to find yourself standing alone on the wrong side of history. As AOC's criticism continued to reverberate through progressive circles, one thing became clear. The young politician who had once seemed like the future of the left had instead become a cautionary tale about the dangers of mistaking anger for strategy and volume for wisdom. The revolution he had promised would have to wait for a leader who understood that lasting change requires building movements, not just making noise. And in the halls of Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had established herself as not just a progressive leader, but a progressive leader who understood the difference between fighting for change and fighting against your own allies, a distinction that would define the future of the movement for years to come.